This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 145 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. Amalith, you've got something on your mind.
At work, a coworker has been reading some production code for the first time. He and I have both been working on that code, but not the production version. We've been working on what is checked into Git. And when he cracked open production, there are many, many, many differences between what we've been working on in Git. And it's not a fun time bringing those hot patches back into the Git repository from production.
Oh boy.
Yeah. It's a mess. We realized some of the code I've been writing the past couple weeks, the senior deployed it, but because there are lines of code in production that there are not in the Git repository I've been working from, the code I wrote just doesn't work because there's an early return that never makes it there.
I mean, that just sounds awful. It just sounds awful. I'm going to just run away screaming.
Yes.
And this is the most critical piece of software in our entire company.
So the question is, how did that code get into production without going via Git? And however that was, find that out and then stamp on it.
Stamp on the senior maintainer's deployment process.
I mean, that's not a deployment process. What is that?
I don't know how he does it. Most of our stuff should be packaged up and deployed via Geeks. That is theoretically the case, and I don't know what he does from there.
What's Geeks?
So Geeks is that GNU free software person version of Nix, where it's kind of like Nix, but it's not Nix.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
I've always pronounced that Guix. Okay.
Yeah, but it is pronounced Geeks. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
Of course, with it being the free software people, it has to have a weird pronunciation.
So theoretically, there is a process. I just don't think we follow it for lots of things, and we didn't realize quite the extent to which we don't.
One of Joel Spolsky's rules, I know I always bang on about Joel Spolsky, but he has what he calls the Joel test, which is to check that your environment is sane. And one of them is do you use source control and things like that? And one of the things is, do you have a single button that you can press to build the software? And I think that's a really important rule. There should be something in your continuous integration environment that says, take the latest Git and put it in production. Right. And maybe maybe developers can't hit that button, right? Because maybe there's a process there, but that button has got to exist. And if stuff is in production that is not come via that route, I'm just filled with terror for you.
I mean, we could get into all the technicalities of this, and I'm sure we will. And Andy and Kevin will have a lot to say about that. But this isn't a technical problem.
Yeah.
This is a process problem.
Absolutely.
But how you get out of it is very technical.
Yes. The coworker that cracked it open this morning has been going through one section of the code and trying to feel out the boundaries of where the hot patches are. This patch is one thing, this patch is another thing, and trying to tease those out into commits and applying them to the Git version. And it's very slow going.
So what I wonder, though, is if you have something in production today, right, that has all these hot fixes in it that didn't make it back into Git, I'm assuming you haven't also deployed whatever is on main or in Git out to production yet. Otherwise, you would have uncovered this and those patches would either be broken or whatever, right?
That's the situation we're in right now. We have deployed those things to production and things have broken. We haven't figured out why until we look at production and see why.
Did you manage to roll it back, or are you just broken right now?
No, we're fixing production right now.
Okay, so you're broken.
That is broken.
That's called getting more broken. If I were instructing on how to get out of this, it would be roll back to the latest thing that worked, even though it's a bunch of hot patches. You would then also find the commit from main that those hot patches were based on, so i.e. the previous deployment. You would have to roll back Git to that, apply those patches on top because you already know they apply cleanly or otherwise they wouldn't be in production. From that point, you now have to take whatever your divergent main is and rebase that on top of these hot fixes. Yes, there's going to be some pain in there, but that is going to be much easier than forward fixing and hoping to God that it just works itself back out.
100%. That is absolutely right. But Kevin, you're assuming they can roll back to that version.
Yeah, I don't think we can, because these hot patches have been in there for who knows how long.
Is there even a button to press to roll back?
Oh, no, there is no button to roll back. I think it's more run the geeks command to spit out an archive of a particular hash and then deploy that.
Do you have a record of like what commits those were built off of, at least, and like what is currently deployed into production? Because that would also be another thing that I would look at.
In theory, what's deployed to production is the latest in the repository. It's just there's all this mess of other things in there too.
Right. I mean, this is why you have that process, right? This is why you have the rule that things only get deployed to production built from the latest or whatever branch of Git, and there's nothing else can be there.
This is the whole point of GitOps.
Yeah, you have development, staging, and prod, right? This isn't rocket science.
Yeah, you don't have to have development, staging, and prod, right? Like, I would be comfortable in certain projects just having a button that takes the latest code and puts it in prod, right? And not because development, staging, and prod is like process and adding people. Are you actually getting any benefit from it because the development environment is not really like prod, or or it only actually breaks when you run it on the live data? And do you have a copy of the live data in staging, and so on and so on?
I tend to harp on this with some of my teams, but like release engineering is a thing in my opinion. And people don't like it. Like, it's kind of cringy to say release engineering, like, oh, what are you actually engineering there? But the process of taking the code in your repository and deploying that to production or releasing it in some manner and in a like well thought out manner takes time and effort to get to. It also takes time and effort to be able to have some forethought about, we're going to have divergent branches, we're going to have different releases, we're going to have different support cycles, like all these other things. Like, this is all release engineering, but it's in support of preventing exactly this type of a thing.
Yeah, and the thing about, like, do you know what version you're running? Do you know whether you can roll back? The reason why you have this whole process that builds from Git and builds it in a continuous integration environment rather than on a developer machine or whatever is exactly because then you have the records of exactly what's deployed, and you have a button you can press that rolls back. And you can build kind of auditing into that process so that you know exactly what was deployed at what time and all of that stuff.
And whose fault it was, Git blame, right?
Yeah.
Now, forgive my ignorance, but could you not take the code that you're currently running, take the code that is the Git master, diff them, and work out what's different?
Yes, but sometimes it's easier to read them side by side, the like complete side by side version, than the diff of these lines are changed.
Right.
But that's still a diff, right? It's just like a diff with full context. But yeah, so if my understanding from what you said, Amleth, is that that's what your colleague is doing, but in order to make any sense of it, it's not just one big diff. You've got to break it into this bit does this logical thing, this bit does this logical thing.
The diff might have interleaved patches in one hunk, for example, and they'd show up as one thing even though they're separate.
And you don't have these patches as like independent artifacts that were applied at some point. Like, you can't look back in time and say like, oh, we applied this patch.
So you've got to kind of reverse engineer what happened.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, good luck. In a way, it sounds kind of fun, right? Like it's spelunking, but in another way, it sounds like your worst nightmare.
That's why my colleague just threw his hands up and said, all right, I'm going to dig in and get this fixed.
Yeah.
In situations like this too, I would recommend, like, pretty strongly, if it's not like the company is actively losing money or has an active security vulnerability, something serious like that, I would actually recommend you do the sort of like either after action or some kind of review for like, how do we get here and how are we going to stop that? Do that before, because what'll happen otherwise, if you do it at the end or you say you'll do it at the end, is you'll finally get everything working. Everyone will be so exhausted. It'll be such an adrenaline dump that they just don't even want to think about this problem anymore. So you do it up front and you decide like, this is how we're going to fix the process. But you could also then pull in, like, if you find there are certain things that you want to change about your deployment process, you can actually start to incorporate those right now as of today to fix the process. And you don't risk like kind of just losing it or getting fatigued on it by the time you actually do fix production.
I tend to do retrospectives after the disaster's happened, but I take your point about people being exhausted. But I think it's really important at the very least to collect ideas while it's all going on, because you're not going to remember and you're not going to be bothered to do it afterwards.
Well, also, like when there's a disaster going on, people are more likely to be like, I just got to push this production. I think it'll be the fix. And you actually end up just kind of breaking things further and further and further. So if it's not an emergency right now, like nothing is actually on fire, then you should be able to say like, okay, we got in this situation via X. Let's not do more of X to get out of it.
I've made it out to sound like it's a bit more of a disaster than it really is. Production is not completely broken. The core things still work. It's one small feature that is used by a tiny subset of people that is not working that we can get fixed probably today. We just want to get those hot patches, hopefully, as much as we can, back into main so we have a coherent view of this portion of the code where that issue is and can get it fixed, looking at the real code, not what's in main, because that's apparently not the real code.
So it sounds like there's been something of a deviation from proper process, but not the whole thing. Like it wasn't from the very beginning. There was just no process. Just something's gone a little bit awry.
And little bits of drift in the code here and there.
Yeah, and that means that basically this is a really good warning sign for you to, like, how can we stop this happening before it does become a big crisis? If you can lean into that and somehow turn it into a change.
I mentioned, I think, on one of the recent Linux Lads episodes that I'm learning Rust. That is specifically because a coworker and I want to replace this entire piece of software with something we're writing in Rust. He's working on a library that we're going to use to abstract some of the core bits, but then we're still going to have a long time rewriting the rest of it in Rust because simply having a pleasant API to rely on is not enough for rewriting the most core piece of our software.
Once you get this part fixed, though, are you going to have a way to say what is in production is the same as in main right now as well? Like, are you going to not wipe, but, effectively like redeploy everything so that you're certain it's all there? Or is there still like always going to be this little lingering, like maybe it's not exactly aligned? Like, how do you plan to address that part of it?
So that coworker and I have discussed, I think, an idea that's been mentioned on this show before, but I have no idea which episode, where we develop some sort of testing framework that is not at all integrated into the piece of software, that tests it externally. Maybe it's some kind of mock server, or we don't know yet, but something that tries to test every nook and cranny of the current software, and then we can just point it at the new software. And if it doesn't do something right, we can fix that.
Yes, now you're speaking my language. In fact, don't consider doing this without doing that. And even if you never make the transition, it will benefit you massively to have that test in place. I can't believe Kevin is so worried about your release engineering. He didn't even take the bait about the rewriting in Rust.
I try to temper my opinions because they are usually well known.
You're going to have so much fun rewriting it in Rust. It's a terrible idea. You definitely shouldn't do it, but you're going to have so much fun. I have a former colleague and friend who I really like, who is a bit of a downer in the sense that when you have a conversation, he's always thinking about what could go wrong and what's bad. But I have to emphasize that I really enjoy his company, and that's not a cuss. But whenever he joins a team, he immediately accidentally becomes the release engineering person, because he cannot stand when stuff is not done properly. And so quite a lot of his kind of Eeyore personality is like, oh, I've joined another team. Now I'm fixing the build again. But it's so valuable. And, when he's got his teeth into it for a couple of years or something, things are just smoother. There are fewer disasters and people know what's going on.
I think there's a lot to be said in a lot of situations for having somebody, not everybody, but somebody who is a glass half empty person who thinks through all the possible things that can go wrong. Because if you've got just nothing but positivity, then you just miss stuff.
Yeah.
In places that I've worked that have had successful platform engineering teams, those are teams that have been responsible for, it sounds silly, but the platform that the code runs on and making sure that it is all done in a repeatable way, a sound way. But they're responsible for owning that section. The code is going to run on this type of a platform. Sometimes that's further divided into also infrastructure engineers or the ones that bring up the infrastructure for the platform. But other times it's been kind of both. But it's that sort of everything from the code, getting it to be on a consistent, reliable, well thought out, well engineered platform. Like those places that have ever like really had that together, it's like night and day from places that don't.
Yeah.
So does the platform engineering team have oversight over the code itself, or is it just sort of everything beyond the code?
It depends. There's definitely like a close relationship. At least this is only the places that I've worked, but there's a close relationship between like they might say, you know, could you do something in a different way, or could you support this particular thing or not this particular? So there's a really close relationship, but they don't necessarily own the code. They own the code. They own the artifact that comes out of the code. They're like fully responsible at that point.
Right. But no matter which way you look at it, there are proper processes in place where people know what their job is. And it's kind of a well-oiled machine from what you've described there, Kevin.
Yeah, whenever you can scope down somebody's responsibilities to a set of things, that's when you're, at least in my experience, going to get like the best results out of them. That's not to say people can't do a lot more than that, or you don't have some people that are just like naturally gifted in a bunch of different areas. But in my experience, like just the general rule is if you can scope down someone's responsibilities to a defined set of things and they can really excel in those things and they only have to focus on those things, that's where you get like a lot of really good performance out of people.
That's interesting. Like, I think that's probably true, but it kind of goes against my instinctive feel of how we should be thinking and working, like, especially as open source people, right? Like, I'm used to the idea of like, oh, there's something wrong in this package, so I'm just going to dive into that and fix it. And this idea of taking ownership of like the success of the whole organization, not just my little closed off bit. You see what I mean?
But in that, it's more related to like a skill set. So there's something wrong in this package, being able to dive into it. Like that could still well be within the skill set responsibilities of that person. Additionally, like someone could be responsible for multiple different types. They're just like responsible to like different teams or different people.
But you as a developer, Andy, you see something wrong and you fix it, but that's not just pushed immediately to main.
Yeah.
Like you'll create that pull request and then someone will review it and make sure that it's not going to break all the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I really like the idea that everyone's invested in everyone's success and not just like thinking, oh, I've done my bit, so I'm going to, it's someone else's problem now. Because it never is, right? Like developers, a classic example is developers throw the code over the wall to some poor person who has to deploy it. And actually there's a load of bugs in it, but the person who's deploying it is just not equipped to find those bugs or diagnose those bugs. The developer was perfectly well equipped to do that, but the developer just doesn't care because it's not their responsibility after they've thrown the code over the wall.
That's why I've heard somebody like describe it as loosely coupled roles or loosely coupled teams. Like the more coupling that happens, the more invested you are in something, and like that solves that type of a problem. However, like too tightly coupled, and then it's just kind of a mix and everybody's doing everything. Mm-hmm. But then too separated, and you have that code over the wall sort of mentality. So like a loose coupling between teams and roles is kind of that sweet spot. But that's a really hard thing to get right.
I mean, I've seen this. Not in the software world, but if you've got a bunch of people who are independent contractors just doing their little bit for a set price, that in theory is more efficient than having everyone on staff. But if everybody is just a contractor, they come and do their little bit and then they disappear. And if that gets in the way of someone else, they don't care because they get paid anyway. Whereas if you've got a team of people who are all like on staff, they're kind of forced to help each other out and work around everyone. And that can end up costing you more money as the business. But I would do it the team way personally. Having been a staffer and a contractor in those situations, it's just much better in the end for people to work as one coherent team.
Yeah, I think it's really critical that there's not a blame culture, right? In order to get people working together, you've got to avoid the situation where people are looking for whose fault it is that something went wrong. Because in that situation, then people start to define their roles really clearly and say, well, I wasn't even responsible for the plumbing, so it can't be my fault that the pipes leaked when I hit them with a hammer.
It's the somewhat naive way to say, like, we're all invested in the end of it, in the end thing. And that's why, like, we'll all work well together. Whereas, in my opinion, that's what kind of leads to the infighting. If everyone is always invested in the end product, right? Like the product finally getting released, that's when everybody gets paid. That's what leads to like, well, I'm not the plumber. I'm not the one that broke the pipes yet. It didn't get released. So therefore I'm also not getting the result. So like, that's why this sort of like weird middle management layer or whatever the layer is, like kind of right above the developer sometimes, like that's why it's such a difficult thing, because you want people to be invested in the end thing, but you also don't want the like throw the code over the wall, it's their problem now sort of thing. And it's a hard line to walk.
Psychological safety is the main job of management.
Yes, very much so. Creating that like safe environment for everybody, because people are definitely going to be more productive when they feel safe. And like, that's just a more pleasant environment for everybody involved. I think that's where I would want to work.
Yep.
Well, we're returning to what we talked about a couple of episodes ago with the management thing, but a good manager is someone who can spot something that's gone wrong and then liaise with the people who are needed to come and fix that. Like, you as a developer might have made a mistake and you might not necessarily be able to fix that, whereas someone else might be able to. And a good manager can see that and say, right, well, Amleth, you've made this mistake. It was in Rust. Kevin's an expert in Rust, so we'll get him to fix it. It's going to be much quicker.
I don't know why Amleth's the one that's made the mistake in this situation, but anyway, like Amleth is then going to learn like something from that interaction, but only if Amleth feels safe in that situation and isn't just looking for a way to avoid the blame.
Mm.
And like Amleth should feel safe in that situation because people do make mistakes, especially when they're stretching themselves, which is exactly what you want people to do.
Back on the like inter-team coupling topic, Dad has always instilled in me this idea of a T-shaped developer or a T-shaped admin or whatever, where you have somewhat shallow knowledge in a very broad array of topics, and you go very deep in maybe one or two that you're particularly interested in. The going deep kind of fits in with what Kevin was saying earlier, and the broad knowledge across a variety of topics is sort of what allows you as an individual to overlap with some of those other teams.
And arguably, if you have a broad knowledge, then you are probably quite good at learning things and figuring stuff out.
And it also lets you communicate better.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And they are arguably more important than having really deep knowledge in one specific area.
The deep knowledge is definitely useful, but the broad knowledge is also useful.
I think that having broad knowledge gives you a bit of a leg up on empathy as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you got a difficult to deal with person who's on the other side of the fence, if you've actually done a little bit of that kind of stuff, you might understand why it's irritating them so much.
I've thought about it before to say, like, if you can learn enough in a subject just to know how much you don't know, like that's kind of that broad level where, you know, just enough to know all, you know, not all the things, but you know, a lot of the stuff that you don't know. That's a kind of a good little personal goalpost or something that you could set.
Knowledge of what you don't know is what lets you more effectively communicate with the person who does know. You can use those words, even if you're not sure of all their depth and nuance. You can use those words with someone who knows what they mean and will understand what you're talking about.
It's also a good combatant against things like imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is a lot of people thinking like, hey, I don't actually know what I'm talking about here, but are potentially afraid to say that. Or they think they know something about it, but they know that there's more out there. But if you go at it from a perspective of, I'm going to know enough about this to know what I don't know, and I'll be open and honest about that, like that's kind of a battle against this, because when you say like, hey, I know this much, but I don't know these things over here, a lot of times people will be like, wow, you actually do know a lot more than you're giving yourself credit for. And it can help highlight against imposter syndrome, which is all too common in our industry.
Yeah, always ask that question, even though you feel like it makes you look like an idiot, because it doesn't make you look like an idiot. It's basically the thing that I've slowly tried to learn.
Well, I hope you get it all sorted very soon, Amleth. But we should probably get out of here. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.